The vacuum of space is usually quiet, but the bridge of the Krell Empire's flagship, the Dread Scythe, was alive with the hum of impending triumph. High Commander Valen adjusted his ceremonial collar, his 4 amber eyes narrowing as he stared at the blue and green jewel rotating slowly on the primary view screen. It was a young planet, a backwater world known to its inhabitants as Earth. They called themselves humans. To Valen, they were merely the next checkbox in the Empire's grand expansion. According to the ancient mandates of the Galactic Council, total planetary bombardment was deemed wasteful. Efficiency was the true measure of a superior species. Therefore, the Council mandated the intimidation ritual, a psychological display of absolute dominance meant to break a planetary population's collective will to fight before a single plasma rifle was fired. It saved infrastructure, preserved resources, and reduced the need for messy post-war pacification campaigns. For this specific task, the Krell relied on their ultimate biological deterrent. Valen gestured to a secondary monitor, which flickered to life displaying the stasis chambers in the lower decks. Inside slept 2 specimens of the Vorgath. To the rest of the galaxy, the Vorgath was a word whispered to frightened children and seasoned soldiers alike. Born on the high-gravity, volcanic death world of Krell Prime, the creature was the undisputed pinnacle of evolutionary lethality. It stood over 10 feet tall at the shoulder, propelled by 6 heavily muscled limbs tipped with monomolecular talons capable of shearing through light starship armor. Its hide was a dense patchwork of overlapping, obsidian-like scales that deflected standard kinetic fire and absorbed thermal energy. Its maw was a nightmare of jagged, self-replicating teeth, and its secondary stomach produced a highly concentrated biological acid that could dissolve ferroconcrete in seconds. More terrifying than its physical attributes, however, was its temperament. The Vorgath did not hunt for mere sustenance. It was a tireless engine of malice, possessing a rudimentary, sadistic intelligence that delighted in the terror of its prey. The Krell had conquered 7 star systems by simply dropping a pair of these apex predators into a major population center and broadcasting the ensuing carnage globally. Within 48 hours, the local governments would invariably beg for unconditional surrender. Valen turned to his tactical officer, a slender Krell with twitching antennae. He commanded the drop pods to be launched directly into the coordinates of a major human gathering hub, a sprawling green sanctuary surrounded by towering glass structures which the native datanets called Central Park. Valen wanted maximum visibility. He wanted the media machines of this fragile species to capture every drop of blood, every severed limb, and every echo of the beast's maddening roar. As the sleek, black drop pods detached from the belly of the flagship and plummeted through Earth's atmosphere like twin meteors, Valen leaned back in his command chair, savoring the anticipation of the humans' inevitable despair. He imagined the chaotic stampedes, the useless firing of their primitive gunpowder weapons, and the desperate, weeping pleas for salvation that would soon flood the subspace frequencies. 3 hours passed, then 6, then 12. Valen grew increasingly restless. The expected distress signals had not materialized. The global communications grid of the humans had not collapsed into panic. In fact, satellite imagery showed that traffic around the drop zone had actually increased, though not in the chaotic patterns of a fleeing populace. By the secondary orbital rotation, Valen could no longer contain his impatience. He barked at his surveillance team to establish a direct, unedited visual feed from the surface drone. The main view screen shimmered, filtering through the atmospheric haze until it focused on the exact clearing in the park where the pods had made landfall. Valen braced himself to see a wasteland of shattered trees and half-eaten corpses. Instead, his upper eyes widened, and his lower eyes blinked in profound confusion. The scene was utterly orderly, yet entirely wrong. The humans had not fled the park. Instead, they had erected a perimeter of heavy metal barriers, complete with bright, blinking lights and large, brightly colored banners written in various native dialects. A massive crowd of humans was gathered around the perimeter, forming long, winding queues that stretched for blocks down the paved avenues. They did not look terrified. They looked impatient, checking their small handheld communication devices and conversing with an air of casual excitement. Panicking internally but maintaining his stern facade, Valen ordered a maximum zoom on the epicenter of the landing site. What he saw there shattered his comprehension of universal biology. The two Vorgath were dead. They had not been blasted apart by orbital artillery, nor had they been dissolved by chemical weapons. One of the mighty beasts was suspended upside down from a massive industrial crane typically used for building construction. Its throat had been cleanly slit, and its dark, acidic blood was being carefully drained into large, specialized ceramic vats. A group of humans wearing white garments, heavy rubber aprons, and thick protective goggles were moving methodically around the carcass. They were wielding massive, motorized bone saws and specialized cleavers, peeling back the legendary impenetrable obsidian scales with the practiced ease of factory workers processing a harvest. The second Vorgath was already partially dismantled. Its massive, muscular hind legs, built to chase down megafauna across volcanic plains, had been severed and stripped of their outer hide. Nearby, an enormous trench had been dug into the earth. It was filled to the brim with glowing, red-hot coals that radiated an immense amount of thermal energy. Suspended over this trench on improvised steel spits were massive slabs of the creature's meat. A stout human with a thick beard and a tall white hat stood over the roasting flesh, casually holding a long metal rod with a brush attached to the end. He was slathering a thick, dark, viscous red sauce onto the sizzling alien muscle, causing plumes of fragrant, savory smoke to billow into the air. Every few moments, the human would turn to a large metal table, slice off a small sliver of the smoking meat, pop it into his mouth, chew thoughtfully, and nod to his companions with an expression of supreme satisfaction. The surveillance drone drifted even closer, capturing the ambient sounds of the human gathering. There was no screaming, no weeping, and no prayers for mercy. Instead, there was upbeat, rhythmic music playing from portable audio amplification units, the clinking of glass containers, and the low, collective murmur of a festive gathering. The drone focused on the bearded human in the white hat, who was currently speaking to a smaller human holding a recording device with a local news insignia. The chef explained to the reporter that when the pods first landed, the creatures had indeed been quite aggressive, roaring and attempting to attack the local law enforcement. However, a local tactical squad had quickly realized that while the creature's hide was highly resistant to frontal impacts, their unique respiratory vents located beneath the secondary jaw were entirely unprotected. A few precisely placed high-caliber rounds had brought the apex predators down in less than 10 minutes. The chef then smiled, gesturing proudly to the massive roasting pit behind him, noting that the biological structure of the muscle fibers was absolutely fascinating. He explained that due to the high-gravity environment the creature clearly originated from, the meat was incredibly dense but possessed an astonishing amount of intramuscular marbling, much like a premium grade of ancient Terran cattle. He added that the highly feared acid glands, when properly harvested and diluted with a basic alkaline solution, created an incredibly zesty, citrus-like marinade that naturally tenderized the tough fibers. He concluded the interview by stating that they were currently serving the creature as a limited-time delicacy called galactic smoked brisket, with a side of traditional potato salad, and that the proceeds would go toward repairing the park's damaged turf. The bridge of the dread scythe fell into a suffocating, horrific silence. The Krell officers stared at the screen, their minds struggling to process the absolute sacrilege occurring on the planet below. The Vorgath, the supreme instrument of imperial terror, the creature that had caused entire civilizations to erase their own histories and surrender their sovereignty out of sheer fright, had been reduced to a culinary novelty. It was being sliced, seasoned, smoked, and sold for paper currency to a crowd of smiling bipedal primates who were currently complaining about the length of the waiting line. The tactical officer turned slowly to face Valen, his antennae drooping in a gesture of profound defeat. He reported that they had detected a massive surge in global digital traffic across the human network. They weren't broadcasting warnings or evacuation orders. They were sharing recipes. They were debating which spices would best complement the alien biology. A prominent subfaction of the human internet was already inquiring if the Krell Empire possessed any avian-based predators, as they were curious if those would taste like what they referred to as chicken. Valen felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The intimidation ritual had failed completely, but worse than that, it had backfired in a way that threatened the very psychological foundation of the Krell Empire. They had not marched into a world of helpless prey. They had inadvertently stumbled onto a planet populated by hyper-adaptable, apex-consuming omnivores who looked at the most terrifying monster in the known galaxy and wondered if it paired well with a dry red wine. Before Valen could issue a command to withdraw, the surveillance drone captured a sudden movement in the crowd below. A large group of humans had gathered directly beneath the drone's optical sensors. They had noticed the stealth-cloaked surveillance unit hovering in the sky. Rather than scattering or throwing projectiles, they unfurled a massive, hand-painted banner made from a repurposed plastic tarp. It was written in bold, black block letters, clearly intended for the orbital observers to read. The tactical officer slowly translated the text aloud, his voice trembling with an emotion that sounded dangerously close to sheer terror. The banner read that the humans were incredibly grateful for the delivery of the exotic livestock, but they noted that the current portion sizes were insufficient for a population of 8 billion. It concluded with a polite but firm request to send down the rest of the herd as soon as possible, preferably before the weekend. High Commander Valen stood up from his chair, his knees feeling remarkably weak. He looked at the screen one last time, watching a human family sit at a wooden bench, happily sharing a large platter of what used to be a biological weapon of mass destruction. He turned away from the visual feed, unable to bear it any longer. He ordered the pilot to immediately engage the slipstream drive and chart a course away from the solar system, demanding that the coordinates of the planet be scrubbed from the primary navigational archives and classified as a Level 9 cosmic hazard zone. As the massive starship turned away from Earth and vanished into the silent void of space, the Krell Empire learned a fundamental truth that would forever alter their doctrine of conquest. Never try to intimidate a species that views your nightmares as a menu.